Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Our guest today has worked in agriculture all over the world, from Alaska to Africa and South America to southern Florida. And now he's here in Vermont as the new director of University of Vermont Extension and associate dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Dr. Roy Beckford arrived on campus just last month, and he's been visiting people and places all across the state. Welcome, Roy, to Vermont, to UVM, and to Across the Fence.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So you have very deep roots in this extension and education, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, what was it about UVM Extension that piqued your interest in becoming the director?
I think a couple of things piqued my interest. The first thing was Vermont itself. I've always loved Vermont. I've been, I've driven through Vermont and been to the neighboring states and so on. But I've never seen winter in Vermont. So, so it delighted me. I mean, the forest, the landscape, the undulating landscape reminds me quite a bit of Jamaica, where I was born. And then the second part, of course, is UVM itself as a university. I think the challenges that I see in extension interest me greatly. So those two things coalesce together to pique my interest in this particular job challenge.
Terrific. And prior to coming to UVM, you spent over a decade as an extension leader with the University of Florida. So what was most meaningful to you about the work there?
I think the experience I had at the University of Florida has shaped my understanding of issues in development, particularly agriculture development, but certainly food systems issues development in the United States. It shaped my understanding, shaped my interest, essentially kind of guided me toward my own directions in my higher education and so on. But it connected me to people and gave me a fuller understanding of how to address issues of poverty and access.
Okay, well, you sent an interesting picture that is often seen by Florida Extension personnel, but maybe not here in Vermont, an alligator warning. So you're shifting from alligators to who knows what here.
Yeah. So what you're seeing right there is the caution for alligators. I mean, alligators, I worked particularly in South Florida, Southwest Florida. Alligators are everywhere. Where there's water, there's alligators. And I worked, part of my work, maybe 25% of my work was in wetland issues. And so if you're in wetlands, you're going to encounter alligators at some point. I mean, 90% of the time they're going to shy away from you, but there might be just that 10% of the time when you got to be on your, on your best.
Yeah, you didn't get nibbled by one while you were working.
No, that has never happened to me. But I've heard lots of stories and I've seen lots of injuries around Southwest Florida. So it's something to be aware of and always something to be on guard as an extension agent.
Well, I mentioned that you worked around the world, so you really do bring this global perspective to UVM. And another example is with fishermen in Haiti. So what did that involve?
The interesting thing about Haiti is that it presents a kind of tragedy that has always gripped me. I mean, ever since I was a student in my undergrad years, I flew over the country of Hispaniola, and half of it is Haiti, half is the Dominican Republic. And you can look down from the airplane and see that line of demarcation in terms of how the forests have disappeared in Haiti. And the forest really is really the bedrock of what forms the agriculture system in Haiti, because it provides the rainfall and the nourishment and the energy that Haitians thrive on. And so what's been happening because of the absence of forest or the loss of forest, there's a lot of movement of water and soil and so on into the coastal areas of Haiti that has caused the destruction of reefs. The destruction of reefs then caused the demise of fisheries. And so that particular picture was a picture of myself and a fisherman looking at issues of reef destruction and looking at ways and means to deal with addressing the rebirth, essentially, of a coastal fisheries habitat.
Right, very important work there. And what about, let's move through a couple countries. What about work in Zimbabwe?
Yeah. Zimbabwe is interesting. I went there for the first time somewhere around 2014 or 2015, and it presented an interesting challenge. I mean, there were political issues. There were, of course, they resulted in poverty issues at the same time. But then the country also has a lot of wealthy people. And so you see that kind of demarcation between the rich and the poor, access and poverty issues and so on. So it struck me. So my work there involved mostly working with school systems to connect farmers to the schools. Unfortunately, we had some nonprofit organizations in the United States that came in and paid these farmers to provide food for the schools, so that at least one meal per day, the kids could access at least one meal per day. And so many of them, this was the only meal they had.
Right, very important. And the whole cycle of the Mapani worm population that you also had was very interesting. But so there it is. Don't forget to eat a Mapani worm.
Yes.
Very interesting life cycle there of the worm and the trees, and making things, again, work on a sustainable level.
Yes. The interesting thing about the Mapani worm is that it teaches a very good, interesting thing in extension work. So the challenge there at that particular place that I went to eat lunch was to eat a Mapani worm. Mapani worm is really the caterpillar of the emperor moth. It's a large caterpillar, and they're in many places, abundant, but abundant only because they eat the leaves of the Mapani trees. If there's the loss of Mapani trees, there's a loss of Mapani worms, and people eat Mapani worms. It's a delicacy in that part, in the Wenge district of Zimbabwe. So the extension challenge was to establish Mapani trees, to make sure that they were protected, that they were growing, that they were doing well, so that in turn you could have the caterpillar have access to these trees to lay their eggs and to grow these worms.
And finally, in the Middle East, what did you do in Qatar?
I spent last year, all of 2020, in Qatar. And my job there was to work on a private agriculture development initiative. These two gentlemen in the picture were the ones that invited me to Qatar. They were interested in establishing a indoor, completely covered vegetable production system, most of it hydroponic, but also they wanted to have a covered fruit production system in other parts of it. And it was a challenge to set this up in the middle of the outbreak of the pandemic. But fortunately, we got through it, and we did a pretty decent job in pulling that together.
Wow, yeah, what a time to be trying to do that. So I'm going to jump to your new home on the UVM campus. It's Morrill Hall. It's named for the late Senator Justin Morrill, who authored, of course, the Land Grant College Act in 1862. Can you touch on what the Land Grant College Act means to you today, and how you intend to cultivate it in your new position?
So I always really held Morrill in awe. I mean, Morrill is a great thinker. The idea of the land grant really was to create access between the university system and the common man. The idea was to bring agriculture and the sciences, and to some extent the arts, closer to people on the ground through an extension of the university out into the communities around each state in the United States. And that's what the land grant really is. An extension as a service, as the outreach arm of land grant universities, essentially delivers on that promise to actively engage with the common man or woman in communities around the country, in making sure that they had research information and empowerment as a consequence of the land grant initiative.
Right. And that's what Extension certainly does here also. And you've been in Vermont for less than a couple of months, but you've certainly
Yes.
hit the ground running. You've been meeting Extension personnel and visiting various county offices like this one in Bennington. What have you learned about Vermont and Extension? What kind of rises to the top as you've been around the state?
UVM Extension is interesting. It's unique and it's a hybrid. It's different largely because of the absence of county government. There's no organized county governance in Vermont, and that actually makes UVM Extension a little bit different in terms of how it's supported financially. But nonetheless, extension in Vermont is no less effective. In fact, in many cases, more effective than other places in the world that has, in the country that has the kind of support from the federal government, from the state government, and from county governments. People are very interested in extension in Vermont. People know what extension is. In fact, in some places, people know more about extension than they know about UVM. I find that delightfully interesting. Part of my job will be to connect those two to make them a little bit more tangible and real in people's lives.
Okay, great. And I think it's interesting. A lot of people in extension, you know, they grew up on a farm as you did, and they're
Yes.
really connected to the land, and I'm sure you're finding that. And just, you know, as we move on, when you're on Across the Fence a year from now,
Yes.
what do you want to be able to say that you've accomplished?
I would want to say in a year from now that I've helped to deliver on the promise of reconnecting UVM Extension to our communities. I'm not saying at this point that it's disconnected, but I want to engage in a kind of reconnection that brings people more understanding of what UVM and UVM Extension in particular can do for them to improve their lives and their livelihoods.
Okay, Dr. Roy Beckford, thank you so much. And if you have questions or comments for Roy or want to learn more about UVM Extension, you can contact the state offices by calling the toll-free number on your screen. It's 866-622-2990, and you can also check the Extension website at uvm.edu/extension. Again, Roy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you.
It's been my absolute pleasure, friends. Thanks so much.
Okay, until next time. And thank you for joining us Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.